Well, joining me now is Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi, a member of both the House Intel and Oversight Committees, both of which are also trying and failing to get documents and testimony from the White House. Congressman, good to see you, sir.
Same here, Chuck. Thank you.
Let me just start with, look, the White House counsel, there was an extraordinarily broad rejection and an odd analysis of what he believes Congress's authority are. But if you read between the lines, Congressman, it looks like he's saying, well, you're not an investigative body. Well, guess what? A law enforcement body. If you open an impeachment inquiry, you become one. Is that what the White House counsel is essentially daring Nadler to do?
I'm not sure, Chuck, but I think it's a spurious assertion to say that Congress doesn't have an oversight role. I think at some point he said we're not allowed to do a do-over, but we are supposed to do oversight, and that's what we're trying to do here. And, you know, Mr. Mueller specifically in his report teed up even various discrepancies that he wanted Congress to resolve. Just the other day, as you saw in the Senate with the Intelligence Committee there, on a bipartisan basis, they subpoenaed Don Jr. because there were discrepancies that came up through his testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee and what was reported in the Mueller report. So that's valid, a valid inquiry and valid oversight.
I want to play for you something Jerry Nadler said to my colleague John Harwood. Take a listen.
So do you agree with Speaker Pelosi, who said the other day that he is self-impeaching by his conduct, making it impossible for you to avoid that?
He's making it increasingly difficult. No questions are being answered about any subject. And then when subpoenas are issued, he has a blanket command to disobey all subpoenas. Nobody should testify and nobody should give documents to Congress. Well, that's a way of neutering Congress.
That's why you call it a constitutional crisis.
Yes.
Is that an argument that you can make the American people see and understand and accept?
I think so.
Congressman, do you, and the reason I say this is, to a lot of, you know, when you go out and cover the campaign trail on the presidential side, a lot of voters are just, look at all of things that you're doing with white noise. You know, it's not, none of this is breaking through individually. Do you guys need to focus this better?
Well, I think, you know, I've had various town halls, and I think people are paying attention to the Mueller report. I think that they know that something really bad happened, and they want us to do oversight. At the same time, they want us to walk and chew gum at the same time. They want us to perform our investigations and make sure that there's a check and balance on the executive branch, and at the same time work on legislation that helps with their pocketbook priorities. So, for instance, tomorrow I'm looking forward to passage of very important legislation to bring down the cost of prescription drugs.
All right, but let me ask you this. At some point, you're making requests to the White House. They're rejecting it. You make more requests. They reject it. You have to, maybe you go to court. Maybe you hold into contempt. At some point, do you have to say, okay, you don't comply by this date, then we're going to make our next move?
Well, I think that one thing that they are definitely trying to do is they're adopting a litigious strategy. And for instance, with regard to our Oversight Committee, we asked for financial records from the Mazars firm, and then they went to court. And I think they were hoping to drag out the proceedings.
Sure.
What happened instead was that the court expedited the proceedings, and a hearing was held on Tuesday. And so I think that the courts will enforce our subpoena power. I think the last time that a court did not was during the presidency of Rutherford B. Hayes. I think that at this point in modern times, courts recognize our authority to investigate, to issue subpoenas, and to hold people in contempt. And so we are going to do that if that's what's required to have a check and balance on the executive branch.
What does the contempt citing do, though, if you can't refer it to this Justice Department?
So there are three types of contempt, as I understand it, Chuck. One is a criminal contempt referral, which is what you refer to. There's civil contempt, which would be civil proceedings initiated by our House General Counsel. And then there's a third type of contempt called inherent contempt. And that's something that we're looking at very closely, where you would actually use the inherent power of the House to hold someone individually and personally in contempt, perhaps assessing a fine on them, where if they did not comply, they would personally have to pay the fine. And I think that would get people's attention fast.
You think that is, of all the different avenues you have available to you that might actually convince them to comply, that is your best avenue?
I think so. I think that that's something that we should look at very seriously. Perhaps all three should be adopted simultaneously. But in any case, I know that the leadership and the chairmen and women of the different committees are looking at these different avenues. I have to say one thing, which is that, you know, with regard to Don Jr., just as an example, you know, his father told him not to testify. I think the White House counsel may have said you shouldn't testify. I think Lindsey Graham even told him not to testify. Well, it turns out he's going to testify. He is cooperating with the Senate Intelligence Committee. And,
what does that tell you? What does that tell you? That why he did that? Like, is that because I think the same thing. I thought, well, okay, maybe they will break.
You know, there's, I think it's one of those things where when you feel it personally, I think you start making decisions differently than when other people are giving you free advice. And I think that's possibly what's going on here, although I don't know. I don't know Mr. Don Jr. personally. But I think that that is what the process is probably going to look like going forward.
All right.